Hi everyone. Oops. Hi everyone, welcome to Knitting Noodles. And in today's video, I am going to show you how to do stockinette stitch. Now, stockinette stitch is one of the combinations of knit and purl stitches to create a type of, I guess you would call it, pattern. Now, I'm going to show you a few samples that I have of what stockinette stitch looks like, and then we're going to get into how to actually do it. Okay, so the first thing I have here is just a little sample of stockinette stitch that I made. You can see it has nice little V's. On the back side, it's tiny little bumps. Now, you've seen for knitting how it's bumps like this, but there's breaks where there's almost V's in there. For the reverse side of stockinette stitch, there is none of that. It's just bumps. And the front side is just the V's. This is something that I made using stockinette stitch. I kind of made it up as I went along. I made a little cape for Zenitsu. He's my favorite. Always like the comic relief guy. But yeah, I made this up. This is the hood, the ridge right here is garter stitch, which is just knit, and then the rest is in stockinette stitch. And this is what the back looks like. Pretty cool. You can make something like that. We have to learn how to do it. So let's get into how to do stockinette stitch. Alright guys, now for this, you're going to want to grab yourself some yarn. Again, we're not really working on a pattern like the last video that I did. We're just working on a new type of stitching or pattern. So needle size and yarn doesn't really matter. Obviously try to match it a little close, but so you can see the stitching more, but it doesn't honestly matter that much because we're not making anything. So what I want you to do to start this off is I want you in your preferred cast on method, need to review how to cast on, up top. I want you to cast on 10 stitches. We're gonna do a little sample piece. So 10 stitches, just cast those on. Alright, we got 10 stitches. So what I'm going to do with you next is for the first row, we're gonna just knit. Now if you want to do purl first, that's fine too. I just feel like doing the first row as knitting. Now whatever row you start your knitting, that is going to be your right side or your front side. You'll see this written in patterns often as RS, which is the right side, and then wrong side would be WS. So that's your knit side. The next row, because we're alternating, you would think we're gonna do knit again, but actually we're going to purl. Now I showed this a little bit in my how to purl video, how the transition from knitting to purling looks, but we're gonna make an entire piece of just this. So as you saw, we're gonna do purl, so we're gonna go in from the top. Make sure you're using the right piece of yarn, not the short tail. And we're just gonna go like this and work across. And just purl the next row. So basically stockinette stitch is just alternating knit and purl rows when you're working it on straight needles. If you're doing something like working in the round, actually all you have to do is knit, which is super easy. If you're working in the round, stockinette stitch is the easiest to do. It's a little more work if you're doing it on straight needles. Right, I'll show you like that. just did our first part of our stockinette stitch. Let me grab something quickly that I'm working in the round in a stockinette stitch. Now this part is ribbing, stretchy. This is a sock that I'm making. Up here is stockinette stitch, and all you have to do for this is just knit every row, and it comes out as stockinette stitch. It's because you're working in a circle and you never really touch the other side, so knitting in the round, it almost assumes that the other side is purl. Now we're gonna come back over here. We're gonna do another knit row. Now for this, if you're just beginning, I highly recommend having a piece of paper and a pen just to keep track of the rows that you're in. But as I get farther, I will show you there's a little trick to tell what row you're on. Let's continue this. Knit all the way across. Knit and knit. All right, and then flip around and we're gonna purl. Now it's very easy to tell what side you have to knit, what side you have to purl, because when you are working from left to right, if you see a bunch of bumps, that means it's a purl row. If you see that it's a bunch of, see if we're working this way, I'm working on double point needles today. I just had them laying around. If we're working this way and the little V side is facing towards you, that means it's a knit row. So right now we have the bumps facing towards us. That means it's a purl row. So we're gonna purl all the way across. Now there are another few tricks. Let's say you lose count of the rows. I like to keep track of where the tail is. Now there are some cast on methods that is actually reversed for this. If you're working and the tail, you're working from the tail back, that is usually an even row. If you, yeah, that's usually an even row. Now, if you're working and it's the other way, you're working towards the tail, that would be an odd row, like this. You're working towards the tail, that would be an odd row. But that's a trick that I've learned to keep track if I forget if I'm on an even or an odd row if I'm writing it down. Another good trick is if you lose track, what you do is you count the V's. So you can kind of see there's one line here that makes a V. That is actually the first row. So down here, that's technically the first. We just worked 4 rows. So right here is the first one. That's going to be 1. It's a lopsided V. That's 2V. That's 3V. And that's 4V, which means we just finished our 4th row, which we did. So if you ever lose track, counting the V's is a great way to find your place. And yes, every time you knit, every time you purl, it makes a V. So I hope this was helpful and you've learned how to do stockinette stitch. We will come back next week and I will show you a little project that you can make using stockinette stitch. Sorry, my voice is breaking. I'm starting to lose it. I'll see you all next week. Bye, guys.